Another nutrition talk with Steven and CeCe. We don't have Ryan today. Ryan's out on vacation. Good for him.
Lucky guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think
Music festival.
He's into those things.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's camping. Yeah. He's got a big group with him.
I think it's like 5 days.
Yeah, it's like an all week thing.
I don't know how. I mean, I've done some stuff that it's where it's at, located in California. It's kind of like out in the, let's just say it's out in farmland. Like most people don't think of California like that. I think if you think of if you don't live here and you think of California, you probably don't recognize how much of the state's really wide open.
Sure.
He's in the great wide open. It's going to be hot and it's going to be dry. It's going to be windy, super windy. Wonder how that turns out.
Yeah, he's got those allergies, the dust.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's going to be profound.
And he's going to
prefer glamping.
He for sure comes back sick. I told him, when you come back, I'll see you back here sick. So
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. And on the nutrition side of things, I can't imagine what that's like out there for you guys. Yeah. A lot of things going in the body that, probably aren't going to agree. We'll see.
I'm sure he's created an allocation leading up to this event.
Yay for immune systems. But I want to talk about nutrition. I want to specifically talk about like macros prescriptions today. It's warmer. It's getting we don't really get spring here in California. We've kind of had a little bit of one for the last 2 weeks. Like it's not sure if it wants to be summer yet, but weather's getting warmer. People are doing stuff with their nutrition and their exercise programs, getting outside a little bit more, maybe trying to dial in the nutrition a little bit as the warm clothes are going on or the clothes are coming off. They're going to beaches, lakes, outside play.
Some realizations happening.
Yeah. They're getting tan. They're getting their tan on right now. Preempting the warmer summer months. And so whenever I get into these conversations with folks, and I get them frequently, and that's kind of where this conversation is coming from today, just on where people are with their macros. And I think there's obviously, without beating a dead horse, because we talk about nutrition a lot here, there's some foundations or fundamental things that we got to kind of preface out there. One of which is there is no one size fits all when it comes to macros.
A lot of variability. Tons.
And so understanding the concept of individuality here, also getting your compass straight with what is it exactly that I'm trying to achieve. And, generally there's some real high level general stuff here. And that could be like, again, it's aesthetics, man. Like I want that 6-pack. I want to look leaner. I want to look more tone, whatever the case is. There's the performance piece, which sometimes accompanies the aesthetics piece. Like I want to look good doing it. But at the same time, there's things I want to do and I'm trying to improve that. And then there's the longevity piece. There's the basic general health and wellness piece. So that's kind of your compass or your guiding light, guiding North Star to kind of push you in the direction when we start digging down into calorie, but more specific macro prescriptions. And I hesitate with the word prescription, but I think it's a good one to use because it is individualized. And so there's no one size fits all. And it's very easy to get a formula to dump in. I mean, if you're on like an app, like a MyFitnessPal type thing, you put in your height, you put in your weight, you put in your age, you put in your goal weight or whatever, and it's going to kick something back at you. Mm-hmm. And those formulas are not altogether different, right? But there's some, I would say, nuance or let's just say modifiers that go into that as it relates back to the top line or found. It's kind of
back to the individual.
Yeah, right? Back to the individual. And then again, what are you trying to get done here? And I think that's where people get lost. And so they're trying to adopt the easy thing, right? Whatever that is, just tell me what the numbers are.
Yeah, just plug it into a calculator and get some goals. Yeah.
And if I do this, then I should expect this result, whatever that result is, again, going back to the compass. And if it was that easy, then we wouldn't even be talking about this and everybody would have their stuff dialed in, and it doesn't necessarily work like that. So what I wanted to talk about was like how we get there. Like where do you start, kind of how do you get there? And then to a more refined number, let's call it that for you, to where now you're in a really good position to, as I always say, kind of turn dials and toggle switches. And again, going back to how people kind of land in this, it's often like, okay, I have this goal. It's generally an immediate one, right? Like I got to get lean and I got to get lean now.
Got this wedding coming up, right. Got this vacation coming up, whatever it is.
Which drives attitudes, behaviors. And then when I say behaviors, I mean like, where do I go to get the information that I think suits my goal best, right? And then that can get a little weird. So again, with on the premising it with there is no one size fits all here. There are some basic things that we can do in order to get us in, let's just say the parking lot of the ballpark, to then get us inside the ballpark, to then get us onto the infield. And that takes a little time to do.
Yeah.
So we've talked about total daily energy expenditures and finding out what your total caloric need is. I don't want to spend a bunch of time on that. We have a really cool guide. It's how much should I eat? Understanding your TDEE. You can go, it's easy. Just go to rdfguides.com. You can download it and it will walk you through how to get in the parking lot of the ballpark, right?
Get through the gate.
Yeah. So you are there, right? You've got a good starting position, but now how do I start to move a little closer to the middle of that diagram there on being more dialed in? And then so the next part we talk about is macros. So when we talk about macros, we're talking about proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And I think on that note, when you think about your macros, you're thinking about the macronutrients in those three things, but there's also something deeper to think about, and that is the micronutrients that come along with that. And when you start to pick numbers, all right, or you're starting to calculate numbers, those are things that you want to understand a bit in terms of, am I getting the things that I need from an adequacy perspective to not just fuel me, but help me reach my goals. And I think that gets lost as well. And I don't want to go too deep into that rabbit hole today, but I think there's some pitfalls that people kind of fall into when they start doing this stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you say, get into the parking lot first, yeah, that would be understanding your total daily caloric need. You need that foundational piece in order to then break that caloric need down into the proportions of your protein, your carbs, your fats. So I would say the first thing to do, number one, calculate that and understand where you are relative to that number. And then once you have a feeling or an idea of where you are relative to the caloric intake number, then you take it a step further and begin analyzing where you are macro-wise. And I would say not even necessarily having goals already set, but just, reviewing the data, reviewing a little bit of tracking, see, okay, where am I right now? And then the next step is, okay, based on the goal that I have, be that your general health, be that performance, be that aesthetics, now that can begin to guide me as far as, what am I going to do macros wise? Yeah,
I think this is an interesting part of the process for people, because when they start doing this TDEE calculation and they're kind of trying to figure it out, a couple things come up. Like, first off, it's like, oh my God, that seems like so much, right? And then when they start maybe tracking, they recognize how far off from that number they actually are, either above or below it, right? Most people, most people say, look, I eat clean, but just because you're eating clean doesn't mean you're eating enough. So often you'll hear us say people don't eat enough. And that doesn't necessarily mean calories, total calories over a longer period of time. Sometimes that happens, they're way over in their calories for 2 days a week, and then they're way under for, the other 5 days during the week.
Big fluctuations.
Yeah, huge fluctuations. But at the end of the week, they could still be way over or way under whatever their caloric need is. And consistency is really important here in terms of the body finding sort of an equilibrium or homeostasis in order to make the changes happen over the longer term. So again, it's like, oh my God, that's a lot of calories. Like, how am I even going to eat that much? So they're already starting with this like anxiety in their head about, okay, well, I guess I got to eat more. Now they move into the macro side of things and they start to try to make the numbers fit in a weird kind of way. And I guess what I mean by that is their rationale gets really weird about, like, oh, I got to cut carbs here, or I got to, most people, 99% of people will find out they're not eating enough protein, or let's just say they should be eating more protein. They may be eating, quote unquote, enough. And
adequate.
Adequate to do what, right?
To not die.
Yeah, to not die. It goes back to your goal. So you have to kind of go into this process, as you said, like, hey, let's just get an understanding of things. Let's not freak out about anything. Let's just get a baseline for where we are and where we've been. Because if we understand where we've been and where we are, that has huge implications on what happens next.
Exactly.
So if you've been under eating, right, your total energy need for a long period of time, we're talking months, right? Not just weeks, but months on end. There's part of this macros calculation process that may need a little tweaking for a while in order for us to start to bring that total energy intake back up. And also add the
process.
Yeah, we talk about like reverse dieting, right? Which again, that's the That's the process in basically taking wherever you are towards the maintenance level that you should be, so that now you have a bank account to work from in terms of withdrawals and deposits. And if you don't know what that is now, right, and you're trying to make decisions, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I know for some people it makes good conventional wisdom. Well, I just need to be under my my total daily energy need, and I'll lose the weight and I'll get leaner.
Deficit is the only thing that matters. Yeah.
Deficit is not the only thing that matters. Now, if you wanted to do draw or connect two dots, yes. Ultimately, if you want to lose body fat or lose weight, you need to be in a caloric deficit. That is a rule, a law. Absolutely, that does not change.
Law of thermodynamics.
However, if you don't understand metabolic adaptation, that your body might be downregulated so much that in terms of your caloric spend through the day, it is downregulated things so that you don't overspend and, again, at one extreme die, right? Then your total caloric need still might be higher, but your body's able to operate way under that.
Because expenditure has been suppressed over this extended period of time of undereating.
And we've talked about that a lot on the show. So again, metabolic adaptation is something you want to be aware of. It's a good thing. That's what we're actually trying to do here. If you're trying to reverse diet, trying to adapt to a new number, right? Or a new intake. At the same time, it can be that slippery slope for people if they've been spending months in this deficit. So again, this has implications in terms of what we're doing with macros on the back end as we're making that calculation. So, or we're making those, let's just say we're making those efforts to again, get the adequacy that we need there over time. So I think all that said, if we kind of use that as a ground or a platform to work from, then let's jump into the macros piece,
side
right?
of things.
Yeah.
So if you have the calories figured out, or you at least have a good idea of where you should be calories wise, maybe you're trying to work your way up, or maybe you're trying to work your way down. What I run into more frequently is people who are trying to work their way up. But an argument could be made, how accurate is that tracking? People are biased in the way they record their food. Some people may actually be in a surplus, but they think they're in a deficit. But that aside, say let's assume the tracking is accurate. And again, this is very individual, but for kind of your general population, where I always suggest starting is the protein component. Yep. So let's not focus too much on carbs and fats. I think people get over infatuated with carbs and fats right off the bat. First, let's handle calories, and then let's move to protein. Mm-hmm. So handle that foundational piece first, because arguments can be made. A strong argument can be made that that's the most important macronutrient or the most foundational. So
that seems pretty simple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there is a minimum amount that your body is going to need. It is for sure a strong argument that is a required nutrient at every level possible.
I would say then, as you say, toggle and your switches, that would be your carbohydrates and your fats then, right?
Yeah,
which would be another step later.
Secondary priority for most people. Again, if you're an advanced user, then you may be paying much more attention to carbs and to fats, and we can get into more of the advanced user. But let's say this is somebody who's been in the great wide open, they haven't been keeping track of any of this. Keep track of calories first, and then we move to protein. Generally, what I recommend is 25 to 30% of total calories coming from protein. Again, this is for your average person, because as you already stated, most people, when they start actually tracking it, they're falling below
below the 25.
Even that 25%. Yeah. And protein, we can do that a few different ways. We could do it as the percentage of total calories. We could use a range based on body weight, based on lean body mass. So there's some idiosyncrasies there. If you want to go by a range based on current body weight, I usually recommend 0.7 grams to start. Okay, am I even getting 0.7 grams per pound of body weight to start? Hit that first if you're not, and then we can begin working our way towards that 1 gram per pound of body weight that a lot of people hear about. If you're somebody who is, has a significant amount of weight to lose, you probably don't want to go by your current body weight. You may want to go by a goal body weight, or you may want to go by lean body mass if you've done some type of body composition testing where you know your lean body mass, your fat-free mass. So.
Yeah, I think this is like what you're talking about here is where people get confused because you just mentioned 3 different ways to kind of get there.
Yeah, so because I just made it confusing. Yeah.
No, I don't think you did.
Listed it out.
You just articulated what I think people don't know how to articulate or aren't quite sure about. And that's the thing. Like, again, there is no perfect number here. And it is nuanced by where you're coming into this process, right? And then by what measurements are you making your calculations from? Yeah. So those are the 3 ways. And I think the easiest way to kind of get the bigger term goal, the higher level thing is like, well, eventually I need to probably be eating a gram per pound of body weight. There's very little argument that needs to be had around that.
It's not going to hurt anybody.
It's not going to hurt anybody. It's going to be way more helpful than it's ever going to hurt anybody. It's just not going to hurt you, right? So unless it's pushing you beyond your total caloric need and your goal is to lose body
you're going
fat.
Bust on calories.
Yeah, you're over depositing into the bank account. So that's the goal. But to your point, like if you're not there yet, here's a couple of ways to back end into that thing. And so, yeah, again, if that's the goal and that's what we need to be working to, and we use that as, again, another guiding star to be pushing towards. The rest of this, I'm not saying it gets easier, but it certainly uncomplicates things a little bit when you start to jump into things like carbohydrates and fats. So you mentioned like where your most clients come into. It's been my experience too, and I think if you talk to any nutrition coach or any coach in general when we're talking nutrition, that's a very common tale. And people think they're doing a better job than they are, and that's fine that you think that. But
protein-wise, you mean?
Yeah, protein-wise, yes, protein-wise. And if you're under eating protein, it's highly likely you're also under eating your calories, right? Unless you're way overdoing it on
skewed, really far one direction.
Yeah. On one direction. And I guess when I say that, I mean like the more advanced user. I talk to people all the time that are, very conscious, of their health and their nutrition and their workouts and recovery and all that stuff. And just had a conversation 2 weeks ago. I mentioned it on another show, actually. This guy's dialed in. He's a sharp dude. Like he's very analytical. He's looking at it all and all the time. And the first thing we identified is, dude, you're just not eating enough. Like, let's not even talk about the macros because he had a really good handle on that at some level, based on his body type, his activity, and the demands that he's putting on himself.
Scale was off.
He was way off from the from the high level stuff. So again, depending on where you're coming in on the calorie side and where you are in terms of your fitness level and again your history, getting to the protein can be done a couple of different ways. But bottom line is like if you're just kind of aiming longer term for that 1 gram per pound, you're probably going to be in a good spot. But you don't want to be eating much less than 0.7 grams per pound.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I think the minimum recommended daily allowance is 0.4 grams per pound of body weight, but that is like your not die dosage. Right. So like you said, getting the calories, getting the protein right, a lot of other downstream issues tend to sort themselves out. That's been my experience with most of my clients as far as let's focus on calories, let's focus on protein first. I don't want you to be, too fixated on carbs and fats, at least initially. And for a lot of people, they tend to fall in a pretty natural range, which for most people, that might be 35 to 45% carbohydrate, 20 to 30% fat, maybe up to 35% fat. And there can be, I've dealt with some folks that seem to do better on a little bit higher fat consumption, a little bit lower carb consumption. Maybe they're at like a 30%, 35%, 35%. But again, those are the toggles to switch after we've gotten the foundational pieces of calories and protein set. And then, okay, now, do we see like you're way high on fat, you're 50% fat and 20% carbs or something like that? Now maybe we'll take a look, okay, what's going on here carbs and fats wise? Yeah,
and I think as you're doing that, like there's things to be taking note of subjectively, as you're starting to add more protein in, and those things would be like, what is my energy level like? What is my mood like? How am I sleeping? Things that, there aren't necessarily a solid metric for, to understand how your body's responding to
subjective measures.
Yes, exactly. So just again, like biofeedback from that isn't necessarily, again, very easily measured. You don't necessarily need a device for this, right? You don't have to track, like on some type of an app or anything like that. You could, those tools exist. The answers aren't there to your problem. but those are indicators of how the things that you are doing are impacting you positively or potentially not positively, or negatively. So anyhow, so if we understand that protein is basically, hey, look, those are our building blocks for the things that we need and want to do, which is, build, maintain, or, and increase muscle and strength.
Recover,
and recover, which is the really important part. And we can kind of lock in on that being the foundation. The other things become a little bit easier to mess around with. So you mentioned people get very fixated on the carbohydrates and fats things. So women tend to definitely not eat enough, right? And when we ask them to eat more, or we're coaching them to eat more, the hardest thing the hardest time they have is with the eating the more protein piece.
Yeah.
Men don't generally have the same type of issues, right? If they're under eating protein, like, oh, I get to eat more, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Right, I get to eat more. So there's a little bit of a thing there to keep in mind. And how that impacts the other things, right? Like, well, if you're definitely under eating your protein, way under eating your protein, again, I use women as an example, then it's likely that those other things are out of balance. And then this balancing of the scales has to happen. And so we get into the carbohydrate and fat. So how much is enough carbohydrate versus too much? How much is enough fat versus too much? And this is where there's a little bit more, I think, confusion on the roles that these things play, these macronutrients play in the bigger picture. People understand protein, I think, better than they probably ever have, right? And the importance of it. There's very little gray area with that. You're either like, you understand it or you don't, right? I think is what it is. You start getting carbs and fats, man, things get a little wacky.
Yeah, it starts getting a little confusing because carbs make me fat makes me fat. Everything other than protein makes me fat is what I hear, frequently. I would like to think that people are getting away a little more from the fat makes me fat. But then we can fall into the pitfall of, oh, I can eat as much fat as I want. Fat doesn't make me fat. But they don't realize the double caloric density of fat, and then we end up, spilling into a surplus or not getting the results that we want because we're overdoing it fat wise. I would say that the carb phobia is still very much alive and well. I do run into that more with women than I do with men, but men as well. I run into it with both. That cut carbs. That's the first thing that I should do
every time, man.
Yeah, cut carbs and,
every time.
And okay, maybe they're all in for the protein, and they're maybe even going a little over protein wise at the expense of carbs or at the expense of fats. So I would say the conversation I have most frequently is like, you can have some carbs. Yes, there can be some less optimal choices as far as carbs as well as fats, but I have to do a little bit of convincing most frequently with carbs that, like, you can have some carbs. You can have a little extra rice. You can have some pasta. You can have some potatoes. It'll actually help your energy levels. It'll help your performance in the gym. And it's not necessarily going to make you fat if you are controlling calories, you're controlling protein, and then we're making some efforts towards carbs. Fats, again, that can be a little bit of a slippery slope for some people in terms of, I call them the sneaky calories with your dressings, your sauces, condiments, things like that can be higher in fat and much more calorically dense than they appear. Your whatever. A tablespoon is 130 calories. So that's one consideration fat wise. But I would say carbs, at least in my recent experience, is the one that's probably most misunderstood. And that can even cross over into somebody who has performance goals. There's a guy that I'm thinking of right now that his, he does fine. Protein wise, calories wise, he does pretty well. And his diet tends to be skewed in the direction of fat, and he, just because of his dietary preferences or his just personal preferences, he tends to shy away from carbs. He's like, I don't really like potatoes. I don't really like pasta. So just naturally, his diet ends up skewed in the direction of fat versus carbs. But this is an individual who also has performance goals.
Yeah, so
and shows up in the gym. He feels flat. He's not able to put up the weight he's looking for. And I'm like, well, I mean, you had 19% carbs yesterday. Right. So
yeah. So one of the things about protein being an essential macronutrient versus the other two that are, you could be, as I've heard them termed as non-essential, right? Yeah. Particularly carbohydrate. Something to note, and I think there's a little confusion around this, not that it's not true, or people might understand the process of gluconeogenesis, which is your body's ability to take that protein and turn it into a usable glucose, right? And so, yes, that exists and your body can do that. Is that where you want it to be?
Certainly not preferred.
Yeah, it's not going to be preferred if the goal is performance. When we talk about that's a broad statement, but if you're going to the gym 5 days a week and you're lifting weights and you're doing some other type of high intensity output type things, maybe you're running, cycling, whatever, and you like to push the envelope a little bit, that is not the preferred energy source. That's not the preferred energy system I would like to be breaking into.
Yeah, that's in case of emergency break glass. That's why that's there from a biological standpoint, is to keep you alive.
Yeah, so people argue, but I can, my additional protein intake will make up for the carbohydrate intake. Yes, from a caloric perspective, it will. Mm-hmm. And yes, from the gluconeogenesis perspective, yes, it can. Is that optimal for you? And again, I don't really like that term optimal. But I think it's an important one in this context, because if I'm trying to be a higher performer, right, as well as be lean, right, and have a life and do all those other things, that's not where I want to be putting my marbles, right? I don't want all of my chips. I don't want them all in that tank. So, or on that side of the table, I would like to get them from the thing that is the easiest for my body to break down and utilize for that usable energy when I need it. Most importantly, around the workout times, right, before and after.
That's what I've been working into with that individual that I'm talking about. Just again, trying to work within his dietary preferences, and he kind of ends up in this sort of no man's land where he's not eating enough fat to kind of go full keto, but he's not getting enough carbohydrates either.
Right.
So what I actually just recently suggested to him was like a targeted keto kind of approach, where he is focusing his carbohydrate intake around his workouts, and then he stays relatively low carb throughout the rest of the day, which again fits his preferences a little bit better, but then may also aid his performance by focusing that carbohydrate intake around his workouts.
Yeah. So again, if we think of carbohydrate as that a really good, easy source of energy to get in, process, utilize, store when we need it stored, and then draw on when we need to draw on it. Carbohydrate being stored primarily in muscle, right? And that's obviously the thing that we're taxing the most in most of the workouts that that people are doing. It just makes sense that we've got that in there. And again, not putting our chips on the table of my protein is going to make up for it. Again, there's science will tell you when you look at that, but I'm telling you to look at the subjective side of things. Like, again, how are you feeling? I feel flat. It's a little tough for me to get up. Like, I'm not recovering as fast.
I got no pump.
I didn't get the pump. Just talking to a dude the other day, he's over 50, was on the keto train.
Yep, I had that conversation with him this morning.
Actually, was on the carnivore train, and we just looked at, he just had his in-body done again, and we were looking at that, tracking over the last 6 months, and what happened there in terms of, okay, well, he was building a little muscle, but he was putting on way more fat than he wanted to.
It was outpacing, yeah.
Way outpacing, and to an alarming rate. And but more importantly to him, he's like, my energy is really low. I'm just dragging ass. And this is a person from a blood work perspective that was having some issues on the male hormone side of things, which I think is an important aspect to bring to the table when we start to talk about age, where you are as an athlete, where you are as a beginner, where you are in terms of your current fat mass status as you're going into balancing carbs and fats. But again, carbs being that primary source of energy for so many things, like, why leave it off the table? Again, if you've chosen keto, you've chosen carnivore or something, is that these are things that you're going to have to manage around. And that's a different conversation that we've actually had on this show several times. So let's move into the fat consumption and kind of the things that people, again, from a high level, like, kind of how do you balance those against the carbohydrates, depending on these different goals. And then we can kind of dig maybe into, hey, how might this be nuanced based on your particular situation, like the circumstances I just said? Dude that's been keto for a long time, that's, he's not over fat, but his fat mass was certainly going up, and his hormones were being impacted, likely because he was under eating. Number one, primarily was under eating.
Are you talking about the keto guy, or are you talking about the carnivore guy?
It's the same guy. I said keto, but I mean carnivore.
Okay. They're kind of cousins, yeah.
Yeah. I meant carnivore. And where you may be coming into this, as well as like standing next to somebody who is over fat and is carrying around a tremendous amount of body fat, way more than they should be, and how eating more fat and less carbs can be problematic in terms of your goals for potential weight loss.
Mm-hmm. So So where do we start as far as like
just fats in general? I think just fats in general, and like where we put those in and how those get calculated against the carbohydrate and the protein.
Yeah. So that, I mean, if we're going by kind of the step-by-step formula, the fats is going to be the second component of that. And like I mentioned earlier, kind of general range, at least that I typically recommend, again, general population client, which is, the majority of the folks that we work with here, 25 to 35% fat. For most people, I would say that 25 to 30 is probably more of the sweet spot. But then, like I said, I do have individuals where their dietary habits do tend to skew a little more in favor of fat and a little less in favor of carbs. But I tend to, say at least 25% for most people for some of the reasons that you already mentioned in terms of hormone production, in terms of like cellular health. Fats play a big role.
Huge role.
Yeah. So the thing with fats also, like I mentioned as well, is we got to think about, 4 calories per gram of protein, 4 calories per gram carbs, 9 calories per gram fat. So you don't necessarily need to be consuming a large volume of fat to be getting in adequate fat intake.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing because when we start doing that, you mentioned a couple numbers there, somewhere between 25 and 35%. People are freaking out listening to this right now. They're going 35% fat. That sounds like, again, that's so much. That's a lot. It's all the other, descriptives that we hear when we, when there's a TDEE calculation going, no way, like I should be eating this much. Like people come in, they tell me all the time, these conversations I'm having, they're like, yeah, I'm eating about 1,800 calories a day. I'm like, dude, CeCe eats 500-600 more calories than that a day just for maintenance, man. Like how are you living on that? Well, it's because you've downregulated and your body's figured it out how to do it. And you're calling me because you're not reaching your goals and you're not performing the way you want to perform. So just open up your brain for a minute. Let's not be emotional about the 25 to 35% fat. So you got somebody that's probably somewhere near, 2,300 grams or 2,300 calories a day, and you give them somewhere like a 28% fat intake. That's around 75 to maybe 80 grams of fat a day. And they look at that number and they go, oh my God, that's so much fat. And then you ask them to try to hit that whilst trying to hit their protein need. And like, dude, this is harder than I thought it was. Like I'm eating way too much fat, right? Because it's being onboarded in other areas. But they said, again, and they had it in their brain that, oh my God, 75 grams of fat a day, that's ridiculous.
Astronomical.
Yeah, it's out of line.
You made a good point as far as fat tends to piggyback on some of our protein sources. So if we're not selecting leaner sources of protein, you may be getting in a lot more fat than you realize. Again, fat has a higher caloric density. And so we're like, oh yeah, I'm hitting my protein. Oh man, my fat is just like, is over the top. I hit it way faster than I realized. So that's where, having the framework of the total caloric intake. And then, okay, now I have some macro, goals that I'm shooting for, some objectives that I'm shooting for. Now I go back out into the field. I actually try to execute on this. I see where I'm failing to execute. Now we can take a closer look at the food choices specifically. And that's usually my process with my clients is, let's set the calories first. Let's focus on protein first, go out into the field, start looking, see where you're landing in relation to these objectives and what obstacles are coming up. Like, oh yeah, well, I was able to, hit my protein goal, but then my fat was way off the chart. Right. Okay, maybe we need to take a closer look at some of those protein sources and maybe tweak it to more leaner sources, or how close are you paying attention to the butter, to the oils, whatever you're using, the dressings, all those kind of, like I said, sneaky calories. And then from there, we can start to, toggle the switches and turn the dials, toggle the switches.
Yeah. So again, just in conversations with folks that are a little bit more advanced, and have kind of done this for a while, again, and going back to the male female component, like again, protein first, fat second, try to get that going, in line a little bit more. And you recognize there's some challenges there. And while you're challenged with that, you're almost not paying attention to carbohydrates so much, right? It almost always falls right into line. Almost always, not all the time. You have to be regimented to some level, disciplined, and make good choices, but it almost always falls into where it needs to be. And people end up being very surprised by that. Like, I don't want to eat more carbs because I am getting this much more protein, and there's certainly enough fat in here to
be satiating,
to keep me full, keep me feeling good. And again, the things they may not realize is like by putting that additional fat in there, you are supporting other parts of your endocrine system and things that are, and as well as your joints, lubing your joints and staying on top. Was the other thing Carnivore guy said, dude. Knees and shoulders, right? Knees and shoulders were really bothering him.
Yeah.
Started to put a little bit more fat back in his diet, or adjusted that fat, got a little bit more carbs back in. He's feeling much better. So, I say all that to say with the fat content is, let's talk about the person that is over fat, right? And knows they are, and that interplay there. Like, again, we're dialing in calories. You need to be in a deficit at some point, right? In order to lose that body fat. So let's say we were starting with somebody that was already overeating and we're moving them into a deficit, and we're doing that through the adjustment of protein. And now we're looking at the fat to carb ratios. For somebody that is over fat, they may need or want to take in less fat, right? Than they are, than that 25%. There's definitely a call or spot for that. The other end of that spectrum is the person that is trying to get very lean for a very specific period of time. And when you start looking at the competitive bodybuilders, as an example, there's going to be a point where that fat content becomes very low, right? The protein intake has gotten there, and they're moving into this deficit, and they are just riding a very fine line of being in that deficit without going so low that they are reversing the process, right? Where they are now losing muscle or cannot perform at all.
Yeah, they're scraping their BMR and not leaving enough margin.
And so maybe those people are taking their fat content down to less than 10% for a period of time, but that does not last very long.
Definitely
right?
not.
They come out of that not with a reverse diet. They come out of that with a recovery diet. One of the first things they start putting back in is the carbs and fats, and particularly on the fat side, to start to bring that back up. The pace at which you do that, or the tempo at which you do that, is important, so you're not putting on too much fat at one time. But the point being is they're not there for very long. Eating like that with like the very low fat diet, it can be miserable, and it can have detrimental effects on both your performance, your recovery, and then again, hormone profiles, which I don't want to get into that. People are always trying to blame their hormones for shit when it really boils down to you don't eat enough, you sleep like shit, you drink too much, you don't exercise, well. You're on a plan. You exercise a lot. That doesn't mean it's good, right?
Yeah, you may be under recovered. Yeah. Yeah,
so people are hearing these numbers and they're going, what in the, like, really? Well, what about the fat guy? Like, what should he do? Well, he might be a much lower percentage of fat coming in, because he's coming in way high as it is, and he's got plenty of that in storage, for us to utilize.
Yeah, so you can somebody who is in a surplus, they have some surplus that they can trim away, and we can trim away calories pretty quickly by dropping the fat intake. Just to piggyback a little bit on what you said, as far as the dropping the fat really low for a brief period of time, 20% is usually about as low as I ever recommend somebody hanging out. I do have one person who is working more specifically on physique goals, aesthetic goals right now, and she's at 20% intake, and that also kind of follows her normal dietary patterns as well. But I would say, as far as something to sustain for an extended period, I never recommend dropping below 20% for some of the reasons you already mentioned.
Yeah, again, people hear the number 20%, they may think that's a large percentage, when we're thinking about fat. Again, that goes to the fat makes you fat, eating fat makes you fat kind of thing. But if you really got your caloric intake into where it needed to be, and you tried to eat at just 20% fat, you're going to find out how, I'm not going to say restricted, but how disciplined you have to be at making sure you understand everything that's going into. There's very little room there. 20% fat is not a lot of calorie, or not a lot of grams per of fat throughout the day. Mm-hmm. So you're going to find yourself at that level eating very low fat or almost no fat meals, or however if you're eating 4 times a day, there might be 1 or 2 in there, that are no fat or very low fat, which is hard to do. Eating no fat is tough to do, not just from a palatability perspective. It's going to be dry. It's going to be
boring.
Yeah, but it's just consistently doing that is very, very tough. So I think people try to go to these. They get their head wrapped around these, like, for whatever reason, they're making connection with the percentages and going, that just seems really high. It seems really high compared to what? Like, what are you comparing this to? What are you measuring this against?
And like you said, go out and try it and see. And like I mentioned, the fat specifically sneaks up on people, because again, I'm not like, okay, I have a plate full of, beef fat that I'm just consuming. Obviously, that would be very obvious, but fat has a way of kind of sneaking its way in with that higher caloric density, and you're eating more fat than you realize. And when you try to dial it down or trim it down to those low numbers, you realize how difficult it actually is and how, like you said, restrictive it could be. So if we're going back though, to that, the overfat individual, they have that surplus of body fat that they can work with. And like I mentioned, it could be easy to start trimming calories by trimming fat and just creating more awareness around that fat intake. And all of a sudden, total calorie numbers tend to drop. But there was one other thing that I had mentioned, or a pitfall that I didn't mention, but it came to my mind. When you have, I got my calories dialed in, I'm focusing on protein, I'm trying to keep the fat in check, where some people will misstep, or what I've seen several times recently, is that the backfilling of the carbs. And that's kind of where the carbs come in, is the backfill after you've gotten protein dialed, after you've gotten calories or fat dialed. So I've run into a few times recently folks who they're low on calories, but protein is good, fat is good, and they're not backfilling enough with carbs. So I know I'm backpedaling back to carbs a little bit, but
what's the challenge? What challenge are they having there? Is it like the aversion to eating carbs? Is it that they're full? What is it? What is it that's creating this?
I would say the aversion to eating carbs. I mean, there's one particular individual that I'm thinking of that is in this exact situation, where she's doing a good job with protein. Fat is fine, but getting up to her caloric goal is going to require her to backfill with some carbs. And she has this
She's scared.
Yeah, she has this thought in her mind for so long that, if I want to lose weight, first thing I do, stop eating bread. We've talked about that before. Like, first thing I do is cut carbs. And there is that aversion, that apprehension to consuming more carbs. And lo and behold, this individual struggles with low energy on a frequent basis, roller coaster energy throughout the day, wakes up in the middle of the night and cannot go back to sleep, which there could be a blood sugar issue going on there, going hypoglycemic in the middle of the night. Your body wakes you up like, damn, we're hungry. And that keeps you awake at night.
Yeah. And you might have that. You might have that internal resistance to eating, but that's not a good thing, right? Yeah. It's your body sending you a signal. Obey the signal.
Yeah, exactly. That's your body kind of requesting like some glucose, please. We're running a little low on steam here. But I would say, it's primarily a psychological factor. And then at the same time, you ask this individual, like, well, do you like pasta? And oh yeah, I love them. Oh yeah, that's like my favorite thing to eat. But it's been drilled into her head over and over again. I can't eat those things. Those things make me fat. Yeah.
So it's interesting because people would say, the person's problem is they lack willpower, right? This is not a willpower thing. It certainly there's a certain percentage of that's included in any endeavor, right? You got to have a little willpower to do things that you don't want to do, and make sure you temper the things that you do want to do, right? I mean, it's a two-way street there.
Keep a lid on it.
Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. The point of this is like, if you have that aversion, like you need to sit with that for a bit and understand what that is. And the other part is you have to have patience in that process of starting to put this back into there and see what happens. Like, and that I find, particularly with females, is the hardest thing to do, where it's just like, no, what I want you to do is I want you to eat 25 more grams of carbohydrate a day. And that's like asking
the world,
right? 25 grams is 100 calories, right? It's not a lot.
Not that much.
It's a banana, right? If or something like that, right? Yeah. It's a piece of fruit. It's not a lot. So again, you got to get your head around this. And so when you're going back to like macros, quote unquote, prescriptions, there's a lot of things that fall into this for people. And it's not just about doing math. The math is just math, but you have to put it into practice, and you have to understand where the concept of individuality lies here. And just because your buddy had good success doing it this way, or says he's doing it that way, whatever else, does not necessarily mean it's the right thing for you. Again, looking at history, where you are currently and where you're trying to go. The more information you have on the current and the history, especially as a coach, the better place we are. Like, how long have you been in this deficit for? Again, going back to the top, how long have you been in the current deficit that you're at? How far off from your protein need are you right now? Like, let's tear off chunks at a time.
Yeah.
And what I tend to find with clients is when you start to do it that way, and they start to, again, trust the process a little bit, and it always takes a little time, right? It always takes, like that first 30 days is a lot of work for the coach, right? Being being the shoulder to cry on or just try to be the voice of reason with a few things. And that time might seem like an eternity for the person that's in the process that has just been so frustrated for so long and not seeing the immediate result. But keep this in mind, the physiological always precedes the physical. And there's things that have to happen internally in order for your body to start rounding the corner here on a few things. And it takes even longer time for you to understand what those are, both through maybe a number on a scale, a number on on a body comp assessment, strength numbers, things like that. So there's this, you have to stay in it. You can't just do it for 2 weeks and say, this isn't working for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of rehab process can definitely be challenging from a coaching perspective, because you're essentially telling the person, hang in there, trust me.
Yeah.
I know right now, like, you're not seeing, well, I'm not.
Why should they though?
I'm not losing any weight. I don't feel any different. I don't look any different. And it's like, well, this process is going to take some time. And that goes back to something that we have discussed multiple times as far as setting expectations from the get-go. Like, this is not a 30-day transformation. This is, at least the way that I coach, this is meant to be a long-term sustainable change. And some of these habits are going to die hard. And we're going to have to untangle the sticky web, to drop another ISP phrase. We're going to have to do that first. And initially, it may seem like nothing is happening. To drop a lame analogy, I sometimes bring in, like when the space shuttle is launching off the ground and there's the giant fireball and all the smoke and like all of this effort essentially building up just to get the thing off the ground. And then once it, reaches the stratosphere, it takes off. And there's kind of like an exponential progress from that initial sticking point.
Right.
But that sticking point, when they're like, I'm on fire, there's smoke, that can be hard to coach people through and have them stick with it and keep the faith in the process.
Here's the beauty of it when you do, though. Like, and if you go through the process in which you've explained or which we've talked about here, once you get that protein number dialed in, right? You got the fat number dialed in, you're in this comfortable range, right? Then you have all this room to play around with your carbohydrates throughout the year based on seasonality, based on peak performance, something you're trying to peak for from a performance perspective, something you're trying to peak for an aesthetic perspective. You have all the other stuff dialed in, then all you're worrying about is that one number, right? Or that one macronutrient. It can really be that it's never that simple, but it kind of is. And like, okay, so now I need to go into a little bit more of a deficit. Where do I get that from? I'm going to
trim it from carbs.
Just trim a little bit of carbohydrate back, and I can. There's other things we won't get into that today, but there's the cycling of carbohydrate.
A little more advanced technique.
As we start to move into things, there's a lot of things that I think people try to jump into right away before they've established that foundation or, again, gotten to the stratosphere where it's like, now we're moving.
Yeah.
Now
a small adjustment, we take
now
off.
The dial gets turned to click, not 5 clicks. Now they're all with all the switches on the board there, man, we just need to do this one thing and we know how that impacts our body. At the same time, what happens when you're maybe not doing things consistently. It's like, oh shit, I better go back and look at like what are my total carb intake, or what is my total carb intake right now? Because I'm getting a little soft, getting a little fluffy, or my performance is starting to suck right now. Like, what is that? Like, is it a total caloric thing? Is it a macronutrient thing?
Going back to the foundations.
Yeah, it's easy to go back to that foundation. So I guess in terms of like getting a foundation, again, there is no perfect number. There is no perfect formula. We're trying to get into the parking lot, as we talked about, so that we can get ultimately into the ballpark. And that is not a hard thing to do if you understand some of those basic foundations. And again, everybody wants the easy button. They want, just tell me what to do, coach, and I'll, that's it. And that I should expect this result, in return. Couple things. We mentioned the TDEE guide, or the how much should I be eating guide. That's free. Go get that. Check it out. It's super simple to just kind of get a feel for where you are in terms of your total caloric need, and then compare that against what your total caloric intake is. That's even easier. There's free apps everywhere to be tracking. Doesn't take that long. It's not that hard. We've never said, nor will we ever say, you have to track forever. But again, knowing the balance of your bank account, super important for making longer term financial, or in this case, nutritional performance, aesthetic, longevity decisions.
What am I working with here?
Yeah. Where are we starting here? Like, what's been going on? Secondly, once you've kind of moved from that, then understand like, okay, so where could I be playing with my macros? First, you got to understand where you're at. Again, what's my bank account say, right? How much do I have in financial investments? How much is liquid, right? And how much debt do I have, right? I've got to balance those things out. So that's where the macro calculation comes in. That's also very easy. We have understanding on how to calculate your macros. We'll call it Macros 101. Keep it super simple. It's not an 18-page diatribe and guide on all this stuff. It's like, hey, here's what you need to know, right? In a page, here are the calculations and the process that you go through with regard to, okay, how do I get into the ballpark with regard to my macros to give me a good foundational starter, so I am ready to get onto the field, right? And that's super simple. It really isn't hard. Yeah, you need to just pull out your phone, pull out a calculator, do it longhand. I don't care. We walk you through it in a video if you need to see it that way. If you're a visual learner, it's super easy. You can get that. And then once you have that, like now you're in or somebody has that kind of information underneath them, at least that gives you something as the individual to be working with, or talk to a coach about, right? Or talk to your friends about to compare and contrast, or whatever the hell you want to do with that information. But it arms you with
information,
a framework. Okay, I got this frame here. This is my foundation. I got some 2x4s up. How do I fill in the rest of this thing?
Yeah, all the answers aren't in there, right? That's not in the whatever calculation, whatever number you come up. That's not all the answers, but it gives you a really good start, like a blueprint for like, okay, here's where we started. Where might I need to make some adjustments here in my plan in order to get to obtain the progress that I need, and what's the most important progress that I make right now? Again, going back to, well, let's get your calories up and let's focus on that through pushing some protein first. Super simple. Like it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. So again, you can go to rdfguides.com. Those guides are sitting there. They're free. They're easily downloadable. We'll send them to you in a PDF immediately. You can have a look at them. If you have questions about them, there's a link there. You can reach out to us. You can get a consult with Steven for free, where he can kind of walk you through and maybe fill in a little bit of the gaps for you, which is a lot of times what I'm doing for people, which is just like, hey, can I talk to you for 15 minutes on this, or whatever. They're grabbing me on the phone or sending me a text message. I'm like, look, start here, right? Start with this, because that's where we're going to start in the conversation anyway, right? And I'm not doing that work for you, right? That's not what a coach is supposed to be doing for you. Coach is supposed to be giving you the tools in order to come to the answers and the conclusions and the formula for your own success.
Facilitating your actions.
That's it, man. So, but at the same time, recognize there's going to be questions there, and you might not understand all of the things, so we can fill in the gaps for you. So that's also available to there too. But just get the freaking guides. Like if you don't understand this, again, you could get on Google and you could search around. You're just going to see a lot of things. Some of them are, I think, a little too simplified, right? And they'll get you on the freeway or the frontage road next to the parking lot of the ballpark.
Yeah.
And then there's others that get you a little bit closer. None of them are perfect. So your dietary success is never just about the food and the numbers that you put in there. I get that. But we've got some formulas in there that have worked really well for us, so we trust. And most of the our constituents out there, with regard to people that we do use the same pathway. It's the place to start, right? It gets us going in the right direction. So you can check that out. And then again, reach out if you have questions for us. And again, a lot of times that's just like, hey, like I recognize a lot of times it's not even questions, it's a statement. When people go, holy shit, dude, I'm way under my calories. I'm like, well, there's a good large part of your answer right now, right? Like, oh my God, I have no problem eating my protein, but I recognize my fat intake is way higher than it likely should be. It's well above, it's probably pushing 35% or more. And as a result, I'm not eating a lot of carbs, but I like to run and I like to lift. I like to do CrossFit and I like to do high rocks and whatever the hell else they're doing. And they're like, I'm already eating more and I feel better. They're not asking questions. They're just making statements like, holy shit, this was really helpful. Like I just needed that awareness. Cool, dude. If you need help, reach out. I'm here. But if it's getting into like getting some very specific goals based on your very specific needs, and then maybe we have a different conversation about, going into more of a coaching program. But free resources, check them out, rdfguides.com, rdfguides.com.